appreciation, I think, not only on behalf of President Ramokgopa and the executive that is and cabinet, but also on behalf of the entire country. And a word of appreciation to the leadership at ESCOM, in particular Mr. Ngumalo. On the 21st of July this year, we are celebrating 40 years of uninterrupted operation of Quebec, the only nuclear power plant that is operating on the African continent. Of course, Egypt is in the process of constructing their own. But beginning, Mr. Ngumalo and the team have had 40 years of incident-free operations at Quebec. So thank you very much, Mr. Ngumalo. And also just to the rest of the ESCOM team, in particular, the men and women at Quebec. But also in tandem to that is that we're also welcoming the fact that now we've got 20 years of operation of Quebec Unit Number 1. You know, we have decoupled the licensing as opposed to clubbing them together, Quebec Unit Number 1 and Number 2. Now we have applied for 2 separate licenses. And the National Nuclear Regulator has found that Mr. Ngumalo and the team have followed all the necessary procedures for them to earn the right to operate Quebec Unit Number 1 for another 20 years. So thank you very much, Mr. Ngumalo. I think it is important that we get to appreciate and acknowledge the tremendous work that is done by the men and women of ESCOM. And Mr. Ngumalo has been at the helm of that. Just an epitome of what can be achieved when we put the best amongst us, the best foot forward. And of course, this is one of the men and women of ESCOM with an impeccable track record, raised his hand to lead this team, of course led by Mr. Marokane and Dr. Mteto at the board level. But this is where the rubber hit the road. So thank you very much, Mr. Ngumalo. Convey same to the rest of the team at Quebec. I was there myself and the DM to express our collective appreciation at the work that we continue to do. Today's briefing really will be twofold. So the first one is to provide an update with regards to the performance of the grid, the stellar performance led by Mr. Marokane and Mr. Ngumalo, and I'll show you the numbers far exceeding even our own expectation and projections of where we thought we'll be this time of the year in the journey to recovery. And that's why I now begin to speak of energy sovereignty, because we are getting closer to the resolution of the energy deficit, and I'll show you in numbers that we are making that kind of progress to give you the confidence as South Africans that this plan that the board has approved has worked, and has worked in part because of the commitment of the men and women at ESCOM. The second part of the briefing is what I had raised as an emerging front. So I've made the case essentially that there's new challenges that are emerging, and those challenges are on the distribution front. So there are communities, as I speak to you, that are finding it very, very difficult for them to afford the electricity tariffs. That's the pricing framework is something that requires attention. And that undermines the commitment we have made in the NDP of ensuring that we are achieving universal access. So you remember that universal access has got 3 elements. So when you say it's universal, we mean everyone. And we'll illustrate to you that we have not reached universal access in the country as a result of, amongst others, the proliferation of informal settlement. Because what that does, it goes outside, if you like, a more staged and managed
we will then
development. And therefore, if planners, especially at municipal level, at ESCOM level, are not anticipating the kind of informality that we are experiencing, it takes time for us to connect them. So you will see that I'll show you in numbers that we have not achieved that target. It will continue to be a moving target, but I think we want to get closer to achieving conditions of universality in relation to energy access. And then the second dimension of energy access has to talk to availability. So Mr. Ngumalo has helped us to resolve the one part of availability. So by availability, I mean when you get to your house, you want to switch on an electric kettle, you want to switch on the lights are on. So you know the problem that we're still resolving was the load shedding problem. So what load shedding does, it means that parts of the day, hours of the day, across the country. There'll be communities when you get home, you want to switch on the light is not there, or the electricity is not there because we have initiated load shedding, because demand is exceeding generation. So we are resolving that question. So you will see that after 124 days or we haven't had load shedding, so consecutive days of no load shedding. So that's availability. Then the second dimension of availability is the problem we want to solve, that of load reduction. And this has to do, as I explained earlier on, with the capacity of the distribution infrastructure, be it substations or transformers, that can carry the load that is placed on them, because that load is exceeding the notifiable maximum demand. So it's exceeding what is in fact the capacity of that distribution infrastructure, and that comes about as a result of this proliferation of informality, illegal connection, amongst others, including the fact that we have not refurbished, maintained, and protected these assets over a period of time. But for the end consumer, the net result is the same, is that they've got periods in the day where they don't have electricity. And what is the tragedy of that situation is that is affecting poor areas. So it's the poor that are carrying the brunt of this, and it's going to introduce conditions of energy inequality in our country. So if you like, the multidimensional measure of inequality is taking another form, that of energy access, being a metric that realizes or defines, if you like, inequality in our country, and it's a situation that we want to arrest. And then on the issue of access, so I did say the first one is just connectivity, universal access. The second one has to do with availability. And then the third dimension of that has to do with affordability. So there's been an exponential rise in the cost of electricity. So our electricity pricing plan needs to kick in, and that's the primary preoccupation of the work of the ministry now, working with Mr. Bala from the ESCOM side, the distribution side, working with municipalities, and also by definition working with SALGA. We have seen a number of initiatives on the part of municipalities that have enraged communities, a surcharge of 200 rand here, what they call a network fee. So we really don't want to publicly engage in the merits of whether the 200 rands is needed or not. What we want to do is to find a more enduring and robust solution to this problem. And I want to say to you that post our briefing the last time, we did meet with SALGA as promised, and we're working, like I said, in the latter stages of the sixth administration. We had already started to address the question of affordability and pricing, and of course also the tariff structure. I'm happy to report that that conversation has happened with SALGA. Myself and the DM led that conversation with the president of SALGA, organized a local business. So there's an appreciation that it's important that we pull together. This situation is untenable. Communities are getting more and more enraged. People just can't afford the cost of electricity. It is really eroding their disposable income. It's degrading their quality of life. So I think as the ministry, we have taken a view with the minister, deputy minister, will not fold our arms. Although that domain, if you come to think of it in constitutional terms, is a exclusive purview of local authorities, unless they invite ESCOM in that space. And many municipalities, as a legacy issue, ESCOM is doing distribution and reticulation. But we have a situation where municipalities rightfully, I want to emphasize, municipalities rightfully says is their domain. But we are agreed with SALGA that we are going to resolve this problem collectively. We think that it's particularly unhelpful for us to soil SALGA and to say that people who don't have a common appreciation of the nature of the problem. So what we have taken, an approach we are taking is more constructive, to say these are the solutions that we are proffering. We really want to engage with SALGA. We know that there's been some work that they've been doing. We are going to cooperate, collaborate with them to find an enduring solution. And then it must be rules-based. on how we are going to do that, the pricing and the tariff framework. And this is where the role of NERSA is indispensable. I want to emphasize. NERSA is indispensable to the resolution of this question. As an independent authority, they've got a duty to protect the consumer. They've got a duty to interrogate the proposed tariff increases from ESCOM and also from municipalities. The plans that they have to present to NERSA are important for the purposes of NERSA arriving at an objective determination. So what we're going to do is not to pressure NERSA, but is to work with NERSA. And also what's going to be particularly unhelpful is for other actors in the space to think that they can carve out a space for themselves to provide for the more affluent areas at the exclusion of poor areas. So that ill discipline will not be allowed. So it's important that we are able to determine the parameters, the exuberance and enthusiasm of other non-state actors to play in that space, I think must be arrested, so that we allow NERSA an opportunity to define that framework. It is important that I make this point because a lot of people at home might not have this appreciation. Municipalities use the principle of cross-subsidization for them to be able to discharge and prosecute their responsibility. So all over the world, it's not a South African phenomenon. You are going to find that in the pricing arrangement of electricity, the rich are subsidizing the poor. So a situation where you have a dispensation where people want to take more affluent suburbs and leave, if you like, the poor to municipalities and ESCOM is unsustainable. And that's why we are going to insist on that NERSA framework, and myself and the DM are committed to that. Find a framework that takes care of the interest of the poor, the marginalized, so that we don't deny them access to electricity. Protect the interest also of the affluent, because we can't get to a situation where the pricing structure is such that it becomes unaffordable over time. But also protect industry so that they become more competitive, or they don't become competitive as a result of the pricing structure. And that's the situation that we are seeing, and that's going to undermine the growth of the South African economy. So I want to say to the viewers at home, industry and everyone, the poor who have been experiencing this load reduction, we will work with the municipalities. We know what you are going through, and it is our collective intention to resolve this question. And then let me just do a reflection on the performance, and I'll go deeper into some of the questions that we seek to answer, myself and the DM and the collective of the players in that ecosystem. Before I do that, just to say the following, that Mr. Ngumalo and the team, Mr. Marukani, the ESCOM team, have done exceptionally well. So over the past week, what have we seen as a trend? And it appears to be sustained now. So over the past 7 days, ESCOM has averaged 70% of EAF. So remember, the viewers at home, when I say EAF, I'm talking about two areas really, consideration: the rate at which these units are failing, and also the degree to which they approximate their design capacity. And thank you very much, Mr. Ngumalo. Let me put this into context. And the same period last year, when I stood before you explaining the strategy that led by the board, Dr. Mteto, and the men and women that constitute the board, at the time Mr. Kelly as the acting CEO, and most importantly, a strategy that was generated and of course approved by the board from Mr. Ngumalo, was that we're going through a period of load shedding, and I had said to the country, short-term pain, long-term gain. Allow us an opportunity to invest in the maintenance of this asset. I think the same period last year, Mr. Ngumalo, we're sitting at about the EAF of 55%. And if you look at where we are, it's a 15 percentage point increase from where we are the similar period of last year. I mean, this is phenomenal. We never expected Mr. Ngumalo and the team to get us to this level this quick, but the team has been transfixed on the resolution of this problem. Thank you very much. We are not out of the woods yet. I want to emphasize, we will be the first people to say to you in absolute terms that this situation has been resolved, but the team is doing exceptionally well. And of course, on the 23rd of July was a day to celebrate. To celebrate because for the first time, I think, since 2018, we had the availability of 35,000 megawatts plus. And this, the last time we had seen these numbers was on about 6 years ago, the 16th of July, 2018. This is phenomenal. And it's a confirmation that this strategy as adopted by the board is working, and we are going to stay at it and ensure that we are able to continue to deliver the kind of performance that is required. And then there are stations that have shown stellar performance. I did make the point that part of the work that Mr. Ngumalo and the team are doing is to do an examination station by station, generating unit by generating unit. That's how meticulous Mr. Ngumalo and his team of power station managers and the men and women at Eskom are doing. Now we've seen that we've got about 6 power stations whose EAF is above 70%. Kusile and Midupi, you expect them to be in that category because they are some of our newest power stations. But I think what is encouraging us is that consistently Matla and Matimba are there in that category. And I want to say to you that there is an intra-station competition, which is very healthy for purposes of driving this EAF. So the station managers themselves, very exemplary in how amongst themselves they share experiences, because your Matra, your Matimba station managers will exchange notes, if you like, with other station managers on how best to achieve this kind of performance, of course, led by Mr. Ngumalo. So thank you very much, Becky, for the excellent work that you are doing, my brother. It can't be overemphasized, and thank you very much. And then there's an additional 4 power stations whose EAF is above 60%. Of course, Letabo is in there. They'll be very upset with me if I don't mention them. I want to speak up Grootvlei for special mention. It's one of the oldest power stations, I think close to 50 years or so. So what the Grootvlei shows to us is that there's no relationship between age and performance. So you can be old and still perform. I'm talking the power stations, so there's no relation. Don't get too excited there. Yes, you will need other assistants to perform at this level. But these stations are doing very well. So what's the message I'm conveying? Is that we are beginning to undermine that argument that the older you are, you simply can't perform. I'm talking about the stations. And we are seeing the kind of performance that we are seeing. I make the point that when I went to Ndrina, when I was appointed, I think there were only 2 lights on. Those who understand power station, the light simply means when the light is on, it simply means that that unit is performing. When I went to Ndrina this time around, they had about 5 lights on. The work that the team is doing, the phenomenal work led by Mr. Ngumalo. And then there's also the UCLF, important. When the Eskom released its winter outlook, Mr. Ngumalo and the team said the following to the country. They say, on the back of the performance that we are experiencing, and remember that they released this around April of this year, March, April of this year. Mr. Ngumalo and the team and say, on account of what has been the performance, because remember they track historic performance, they are not necessarily talking about what the projections are going into the future. So they take a conservative approach. They generated 3 scenarios. I want to isolate their most optimistic scenario. Mr. Ngumalo and the team said to the country, Mr. Marokani and the board, that on the optimistic scenario, we are foreseeing that if we were to have the amount of units failing, their aggregate megawatts of failure being 14,000 megawatts, we are not going to see load shedding in winter. So that's our best case scenario. Look at what they've done. What they've done is that we are experiencing now, past 7 days, we are at 9,000, below 10,000. So we are 4,000 better, at least on account of the past 7 days. 4,000 better than even our most optimistic case. And that's why that 123, 24 days of no load shedding, 87, 89 of those days is during winter. That's phenomenal. So I think it's important that you have that appreciation, because that's when you have a peak demand. Even during the coldest period across the country, not necessarily isolated to the Western Cape, we did not see the levels of load shedding. Let me put this number into perspective. This 9,800, that's the total losses at any given time. When I stood before you, same period last year, the total losses were sitting at 16,400 megawatts. So what the team has done, they found an additional 7,000 megawatts. So by any measure, that's phenomenal. And that's why I'm saying that the work that Mr. Ngumalo, of course, led by Dr. Mteto and Mr. Marokane have done, it's phenomenal. It's beyond our own expectations. So what we are expecting of them is to sustain that. And sustaining it is to remain within that band that they've established since the start of the financial year. They are hovering, oscillating between 9,800 and 12,400 megawatts. They must remain within that band. And I'm confident that Mr. Ngumalo and the team would want to do to be closer to the lower figure of 9,800, because we know now that it can be achieved. That stemming from 2018, we're going back to those levels, and I know that quietly where he's seated is to ensure that we even better that mark. So we'll keep on, if you are moving the mark, illustrating that the combination of the leadership that is there and the expertise can help us to resolve this question. Just in number terms, the 70% average is over the past 7 days. But I think the more telling number is the EAF year to date, because that is over a period of time, about 62%, 7 percentage point increase from the 55% that we had experienced the last year. So that's a very, very significant. And we also show you, you can see that the trend line is going up in relation to the performance of the weekly performance of in relation to the EAF. When the week 10 started, week 10 starting from the 1st of April, because the financial year, so you do that those weeks. Week 10, since the 1st of April, we're at 63%, the EAF, and now slowly we're going up to, now we're sitting at 71%. But you can see that consistently, we're about 68, 66%, and that's the benchmark, the new benchmark. The team will continue to make that improvement. And of course, the total unplanned capacity loss factor. So there's a relationship between the EAF. The higher the EAF, it means that the lower the levels of losses. And I just shared with you that we have reached a low of about 9,800 megawatts, last achieved about 2018. So that's the progress that we are making. And another number that is significant to all of us, because this is going to be more important much later when Eskom makes applications in relation to tariff increases. NERSA will ask the question, what is the cost of generation? And if you are mixed, you are relying heavily on open cycle gas turbine. You are burning diesel to keep the lights on. It means that it's going to have implications on the underlying cost structure, because you must account for that for us to be able to keep the lights on. And I want to say to the country that you can see that with 123 days of no load shedding, and of course very little usage of diesel, I think we are 9 billion rands lower than where we are from an expenditure point of view compared to the same levels last year. I think we're at about 12 billion around this time last year. Now we're at 3 billion rands. And thanks to the work that Mr. Ngumalo and the team are doing. What's the point I'm making is that we need to bring down that cost structure of generation. Because like I said, over a period of time, it's got implications on the tariff structure. Because it's a structural issue, if you like, from a pricing point of view. And the teams are beginning to negate, if you like, our over-reliance on diesel. From gigawatts hour terms, the lower we produce electricity from diesel, the lower the gigawatts coming out of that source. And you can see that, week 13 last year, we had generated 58 gigawatts of electricity from open cycle gas turbine. Now, week 13, the comparative period, only 9 gigawatts. And then now, as I speak to you, almost nothing coming out of the OCGTs. Thank you very much, Mr. Ngumalo. I can't overemphasize the work that you are doing. I know, extremely soft-spoken. You always tell me, don't congratulate a fish for swimming. This fish is not suffocating, so we really need the fish to continue to swim for us to be able to have a hearty meal. So thank you very much, Mr. Ngumalo, and by extension, the men and women of Eskom. As I conclude, I want to talk to the issues of pricing. So there's an uproar across the country. Of course, we have seen that the surcharge, 200 rand. By the way, for the record, there are other municipalities that are having the same cost structure. I think it's important I make the point. And I think for us, it's not to ventilate these issues in public. It's important that we resolve the problem. So we've identified the problem. We'll work with municipalities to ensure that we're able to resolve the problem. So we want to suggest to the country that, in essence, there are 6 broad areas that are going to receive our attention. So is the ESCOM's holdings distribution, so the distribution element that is led by Mr. Bala, and of course the NTCSA, I mean, up and running on its own now, I think since the 1st of July, is the tariff structures associated with those. So there's a need for us to have a greater levels of interrogation collectively to ensure that they are truly price reflective. And then is the evolution of the electricity subsidy framework. And this I really want to combine it with the review of the basic electricity. So we know that as part of what I refer to the social wage. So the social wage is that assistance that is provided by the state to the poor in particular. It comes in 2 forms. It comes in the forms of direct transfer, money in your pocket, your SRD grant, you get that money, your child grant and all of that, old age grant, that's money in your pocket. So you can go to an ATM and withdraw that money. So you decide how to use it. And there's what I call non-cash transfers. So essentially it's a subsidy we are giving to the poor, a particular threshold of free basic services, and we're targeting water and electricity. So it's important that that must evolve. What we know is that there's meant to be about 10 million households that benefit from this. But what we know is that only 2 million are benefiting from this. So essentially that money finds its way to municipalities, but it doesn't find its way to the beneficiaries. And it's as a result of a multiplicity of factors. So you find the most prominent one in a municipality. It takes forever for a municipality to register people on the indigent, whilst in fact that money has come through. And when it comes through, it's not a conditional grant. So it means that municipalities can use it for whatever means or ways they want to do it. So it's important that we protect that for purposes of the poor, so that we cushion them if they exceed that threshold against these tariff increases. But we really want to determine a threshold that it's well examined and it provides for an average consumption of an average poor household, so that they don't have the burden of paying for this. Because I'll tell you what this does. On the one hand, you are giving them old age pension grant, you are giving them a child grant, you are giving them the SRD, so that's a cash transfer, it's in their pocket. So we say, I'm helping the poor. On the other side, you are taking it back through these tariffs. So you are negating the impact of the social wage. So it's important that we address that. And I did make the point that the people that are devastated the most, so you will not find this load reduction in your suburban areas, because the municipalities have got interventions for credit control. You find it in poor areas. And then you find collateral damage. You find a gogo who is very diligent, does everything possible to pay for the municipal bill, but because the surrounding households that share the distribution infrastructure with her, a great majority of them are not paying. When there's load reduction, it's for everyone. She can't be isolated. And that's collateral damage. It's extremely unfair. And essentially, you are getting into an area of energy access inequality. We don't want that situation. I want to emphasize, those that can pay must and should pay. It's very important. So you have public servants, middle to high income earners. They are hiding behind the poor. The same rhetoric, the same voices. No, this is, we can't afford, we accept that, we'll protect the poor. Those who can pay have to pay. And like I said, we'll work on that pricing formula. And then the other area is around the distributed generation in the context of distribution industry reforms. So I think that we are going to eliminate that element of having to account for, if you like, the transmission line, the long lines, because it's a distributed generation. So if you like, the kind of reticulation that is required essentially is isolated in that area. Of course, there's intra connectivity for you to have a complete system. So I'm just saying, in the context of an evolving energy supply environment, you also need to take into account these issues. And like I said, we need to review of the annual tariff increase methodology. There is a number of variables that sits there. There's parameters that have been defined there. I think we need to revisit those parameters in the context of an industry that is evolving. So we need to ensure that we are able to address a wide range of issues. So it's about the economic, environmental, strategic, and structural, organizational, technological, and other challenges. So we find that in other parts of the world, when you do this tariff structure pricing plan, it responds to all of the above. So not only just the cost of supply, but the socio-economic dimension. Very complex calculus. So we have everything, the tools for us to enter into this space, begin to interrogate how we arrive at these prices. Like I said, we're simply surfacing some of the issues that are requiring our attention going into the future. And of course, there will be questions regarding the cost of recovery, classification of underlying asset, electricity subsidies, and the consequential impact of efficiency, equity, and sustainability. I'm raising these are the key questions in the context of unbundling. So when you say I've unbundled the transmission, I'm working on distribution, I'm working on generation, you must address these issues of cost recovery and the underlying costs associated with all of these elements that constitute the totality of energy reticulation in this country. And what unbundling is going to help us to do is the transparency of that pricing, and we'll be able to interrogate it further so that you don't burden the end consumer as a result of the inefficiencies that are built into this behemoth. So it's important that we're able to address it. Like I said, the review of the energy pricing policy is imperative for setting a clear pricing policy and for industry and for NERSA to implement. So fundamentally, myself and the DM as the executive authority, we carry that responsibility of ensuring that there's a clear pricing policy in the country. And on the back of that, you develop that methodology, and that methodological approach then is given to NERSA to make that determination. So NERSA is indispensable. NERSA will not be pushed. We'll work with NERSA as an independent body. But fundamentally, that problem sits here on pricing policy. So because NERSA simply execute against your pricing policy, and they determine the parameters for tariff review. And when ESCOM and any other player submits, is on the back of the policy that then gets to be codified in the form of a methodology, and they use that methodology to make a determination. So it's not a NERSA problem. It's a policy articulation problem. And ourselves, ESCOM and all the players will make sure that we address that. NERSA will not be pushed. NERSA will not, it's not going away. I really want to make the point, because there are other non-state actors who want to come into the space, nitpick on what they want to do. No, that won't happen under our watch. We're going to protect the sovereign interest, protect the poor, protect the interests of ESCOM, protect the interests of industry, and by definition, the interest of business in its totality. I think it's important that I make that. So it's important that that electricity pricing policy that we are working on with the DM, it seeks to strike a balance. So this is an important part. It's an important part and very complicated. We want to strike a balance between providing affordable electricity tariffs for low-income consumers. So it's important that we surface this. We accept that there's a body in our country or a community that simply cannot afford, on the back of objective reasons, the performance of the economy, you mentioned them. We need to protect them. They have the right to access this electricity, and therefore it must be affordable. And that's why that subsidy framework is important, because they'll be supported on the back of that subsidy framework. And a cost-reflective tariff for all other consumers. So it doesn't follow that even if you are rich, you can be pickpocketed. Because a tariff dispensation must not serve to pickpocket the rich. It's important that it must reflect this transparent pricing that is associated with the various components of the value chain of delivery. And that's why the unbundling is important for us to have sight of what are the costs associated with each and every one of these players in the value chain. So I think it's important that we are able to do this. And then we also make the point that we want to ensure that tariffs reflect the cost structure into the future. The multi-year price determination methodology for municipalities and the ESCOM retail tariff structural adjustment methodology needs to be evolved. So of course now the requirement, I think it's a 5-year, Treasury says a 5-year outlook, but we know in that 5 year there's going to be, I mean the rate at which there is a new innovation, this industry is evolving rapidly. So we need to find what is essentially the right, if you like, horizon for us to make this determination. Like I say, I'm surfacing the issues that are confronting myself and the DM and the industry. We have every intention of addressing those. So an integrated national subsidy framework in line with the electricity pricing policy is required. And this is really targeting the poor. There can't be an arbitrary taxation. So someone can wake up tomorrow and say, I'm introducing this and that surcharge. It must be justified. And there has to be clarity from the electricity pricing policy. Exactly what is that for? So if there's that for the cost of the network, we ask the question, how old is the network? Have you not defrayed the cost? Are you replenishing the network for you to justify an additional cost? Those questions must be answered, but they must be answered within a particular framework. And this will address the issues of equity, prevent the unintended subsidies, and promote a fair distribution of costs. So essentially, you introduce a surcharge in lieu of you having lost your revenue stream because the rich have really taken on board the incentive offered by National Treasury. They've installed rooftop solar solution inverters. They are consuming less. Your projection on income is undermined by the fact that people are paying less because of behind-the-meter intervention. Now you want to recover that losses from someone else. So essentially it will be the poor now who are subsidizing the rich. It can't happen that way. And also you can't subsidize the affluent for taking advantage of our resources for them to self-generate. And that's why I'm saying it's a complex calculation that requires our attention. I've made the point, approximately 14% of the households are neither connected to the grid nor supplied with electricity via off-grid solution. One of the action that Mr. Bala is working on, I did say we need to rethink that in that grant that is meant for universal access to ensure that, and ESCOM is already doing that. You have non-grid solutions. So you don't need the ESCOM wires, the municipal wires. You can have a non-grid solution. ESCOM is doing that. So how best do we ramp that up? Because what that does, using cheaper forms of generation, you are able to guarantee supply to the poor, and then you are removing the risk of them not paying of ESCOM, of municipalities, and we are in a good space, and that's a clean forms of generation. We know that in 2019, 10 million houses were funded by the national budget to receive free basic services, if you like. However, only 2 million received this subsidy. So that's the point I'm referring to. So how best do you protect the poor? So we know that there's that allocation. So how best do you use that allocation to make sure that it reaches the poor? So your traditional forms of subsidy should be rethought. And that's why Mr. Bala and the team, those non-grid solutions can be used to repurpose this funding for us to accelerate the rollout and essentially don't carry the burden of a monthly subsidy because they are generating from renewable sources, and we are able to address this situation going forward. And furthermore, we want to make the point that electricity consumption levels have changed significantly since the 50 kilowatt hour monthly allocation was determined in 2005. The current allocation is insufficient and warrants reviewed, tied into off-grid solution. What's the point we're making? About 19 years ago, we introduced these free basic services. The threshold was 50 kilowatt hour. But we know that this now is insufficient. But that policy has not kept up with what the economy determined. But also I've made the point of off-grid solution. So it could be the case that if we roll out aggressively this off-grid solution, this 50 kilowatt hour is still sufficient, or in fact, the assumption is that you are tied to the grid. If you are tied to the grid and we buttress that with other solutions, it could be the case that the 50 kilowatt hour is sufficient or is even more than what people need. And in that instance, we are able to protect the poor going forward. So I really want to make the point that we're doing everything possible to ensure that we are able to address this situation, and that tariffs currently recover fixed costs through a variable charge imposed, a revenue risk for the utility, and increases tariffs for all customers. And our point is that we need a correct separation and structuring of network, retail, and energy costs in the tariff charges will provide the correct economic signal and payback period for the alternative energy decisions by comparing the energy cost of the utility versus the energy cost of the alternative. So those are part of the robust arrangements that we are introducing. So in conclusion, I really want to say to South Africans, we are alert to the crisis that is confronting us. I'm characterizing it as a crisis because we have reached those conditions of we don't have energy access parity, there's significant inequality, and the poor are finding it very difficult, and their disposable income is eroded. There's energy poverty on that front, and in fact, the middle class is also finding it very difficult. They have to make very difficult choices of how they spend their money on. It's eroding their quality of life. We are aware of this. We are going to attend this within a particular discipline. We are going to set the framework. We can't allow other non-state actors to come into the space and undermine the work that we are doing. We are going to introduce that discipline. NERSA is going to be key. ESCOM is key. SALGA is key. Communities are key in us finding this solution. I really want to say to you that we are confident that working with municipalities and all the actors, we are going to find this solution and ensure that the tariff must reflect all the costs, regardless of who is responsible to build the infrastructure. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister. Colleagues, with all of those insights, we would now like to open the floor to questions from members of the media. We'll stick to our established protocol where you will introduce yourself and the media house you represent. We'll start with questions in the room, followed by those shared on our online platform. By a show of hands, any questions?
Minister, thank you very much for your time. Zola Sholana from Newsroom Africa. This is actually a question that's coming from one of our viewers who says, it is frustrating to hear that load shedding has stopped, yet load shedding continues for 5 hours at a time in townships daily and without notice or schedule. As a result, he has lost about 100 broiler chickens today because they did not plan in advance. So perhaps you could just respond to that question for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Zola. Any other hand in the room?
Good morning, Minister. My name is Bonsu from Kaya News. My question is quite in line with what Zola has asked. Maybe clarify for us what the difference between load shedding and load reduction is. It's basically the same thing from a practical point of view, where people don't have electricity for a certain number of hours but word it differently. Thank you.
Thank you, Bonsu. Any more questions before we take Takalani? Takalani, can you take us through the questions online?
Thank you, Takalani. Thank you, colleagues. We have a couple of questions here that are coming from online platforms, and the first ones are coming from Ramokgopa from Independent Media Group. The first question is, when will the draft IRP 2024 be published? And the second question from Lamis Umaji, News 24, is the NERSA made a decision on ESCOM's application to reserve grid capacity for renewable energy procurement And if the application fails, would that jeopardize the success of future bid windows and the minister's plans to be ultra aggressive with renewables? And 4 questions from Terence Kramer from Engineering News 1. Does the minister have any comment on the withdrawal of Total Energies from Bralpada and Lupet gas finds? And number 2, ESCOM is speaking about a relatively large generation build program. Has ESCOM received a dispensation outside of the IRP 2019 for these projects, and how will these projects be financed cost effectively given the debt relief restrictions on new debt and its weak credit ratings? And when will an announcement be made on the approach to independent transmission projects? And does the minister agree with ESCOM's objection to the issuance of licenses to the new private traders? And we have Janine Erasmus from Business Day. Can we have an update on the bid window 7 on the REI triple PP? And will the bid submission deadline be extended again? And how many bids have been received? And when will the winning bidders be announced? And will there be a bid window 8 this year? And Chris Yelland from Business Intelligence. Please, can the minister provide some indication on when the IEP and the IRP for electricity be finalized to ensure alignment? And does the Department of Electricity and Energy intend to finalize the IEP before finalizing the IRP for electricity? And Chris Yeland again, please can the minister comment on whether the success and timelines for the procurements under the IPP Office bid window 7 may be impacted by NERSA's recent rejection of ESCOM's application to give preferential access to the grid for public procurements. And Miriam Isa from E-Business Intelligence. When does the minister expect the respective roles of the Minister of the Department of Mineral and Petroleum Resources and the Minister of Energy and Electricity to be clarified? And will the DNPR Minister be retaining responsibility for the full upstream, midstream and downstream value chains of liquid fuels? And it is noted that the DNPR Minister, Minister Mantashe, delivered a budget vote to Parliament for the old DMRE, combining minerals, liquid fuels, energy and electricity, as opposed to having separate budget votes for the new DNPR and Department of Electricity and Energy. And when does the Minister foresee that the separation and operationalization of the new DNPR and DOEE will be effected? And Terence Kramer from Engineering News, where is the Department of Energy and Electricity be located, and how many staff will be moved from DMRE to the Department of Electricity and Energy, and who is the DG, and when will a permanent DG be appointed? And the following question is from Lamis Omaji from News 24. The question is, the recent PCC State of Climate Action Report warns that South Africa will not be able to meet its 2030 climate commitments if there is delayed coal decommissioning. Will the Electricity and Energy Department consider this report, which also notes government's contradictory policies are hindering climate fiction in future energy planning and the finalization of IRP 2023? And the last 2 questions from Helmo. How many hours of pumped storage were used in the percentage increase in the coal consumption for May and June? Thank you.
Thank you very much for all those questions. I think we'll start with Mr. Bala, who will touch on briefly on the load reduction, and then he will hand over to Mr. Ngumalo on the pump storage, the usage, before handing over to the Minister for the rest of the questions.
Thank you for the question and good morning. The question was, what is the difference between load reduction and load shedding? I think the Minister has has done a good job in explaining the difference. Load shedding, when there's a deficit between what is being generated and what is being consumed, that's the era when we go into load shedding. On the other hand, load reduction is a localized situation whereby what is being consumed exceeds the design capacity of the infrastructure. That is load reduction. So as responsible license holders of distribution licenses, it is our job to protect the infrastructure, because the alternative is for us to allow the infrastructure to be overloaded to the extent that it goes up in flames, which then results in extended periods of outages. We know we've had those situations whereby people sat for 3 months, 6 months, up to a year without electricity, simply because the transformer at the corner had exploded because of overload. So proactively, as operators, we need to monitor these transformers, this infrastructure, in terms of the loading, and proactively then manage it in a way that saves the life of the transformer. Thank you.
Thank you, Tsakane. I think the question on pump storage, maybe let me explain. The pump storage is used for, apart from generating during the peak hours, but it's also used by the system operator to manage the grid. One of the problem of having, especially during off-peak hours, during between midnight and 5 o'clock in the morning, where you have too much excess capacity, the system operator needs some levers as well. So what he will do then, he will use more the pump storage during the day, so that he create, because it uses when it pumps, it also consumes electricity, just to make sure that the network is not affected by the high frequency incidents as well. So the utilizations of the pump storage in the past week, as you've seen with the EAF improving over average above 70%, has been very minimal for only over the peak, and also to create that pumping hours to be used during the off-peak hours to balance the grid as well. So to protect it against over frequency as well, because sometimes when there is load shedding, the risk is under frequency, but when high frequency is also as dangerous. So the system operator balances that by using the pump storage as well. So it's been used for those purposes really for this week. Quite minimum. The coal and the nuclear has been able to meet the demand. Hence, we have seen that some of the units were even placed on cold reserve here. Thanks, Minister.
Thank you, Monde. Thank you, Becky. Maybe just to reinforce the answer given by Monde on the difference between load reduction and load shedding. We've gone to town to try and explain it. Just to give you a context, and it dovetails nicely with what Mr. Ngumalo was saying. He makes the point that we had units that were on cold reserve. So simply meaning that we are generating so much more than what you need, and to protect the grid, you pull back the generation from some of those units. So we've been having that sometimes during the day, could be about 5,000 megawatts of more than what we need, but you still have that load reduction. So there is no problem on our ability to to meet the demand. It's simply that is localized. So, for an example, let me take it closer to home so that our viewers can understand it. So just imagine a suburb. So during load shedding, you'll be into a block or a cluster, and in some blocks it will include a more affluent area and a poorer area. In some instances, you are part of the block. But you find that in the more affluent area, there has not been infill. By infill, I mean, unlike in the more poorer areas, so you have more backyard dwellers over a period of time because the landlord is not working, is out of employment, or wants to complement his or her income. He's got backyard dwellers, so they are consuming more and more and more. So the footprint of the settlement has not grown, but the number of households has grown. And demand placed on that substation that is given to those two streets is significantly higher. Then they initiate a load reduction. Let me give you in numbers 10 so that we have a full appreciation. Just from Eskom side, the number of houses across the country that are affected by load reduction is about 366,000. And the number of households, the total household that Eskom is supplying is 7 million. So it's 5% that is affected by this load reduction. Are we dismissive of the 5%? No. And that's why about 60% of my earlier input was to say how best are we going to ensure that we protect that 5% in the main, including others. Because it's largely poorer areas. I really have to be as blunt as possible because that's where you find the proliferation of this illegal connection, the growth of informality, informal settlements, on account of a multiplicity of reasons, which are both objective and subjective. I don't think that is a conversation for today. So we want to find a way on how best to address that situation. And then, of course, to Zola and Ms. Motsepe, that's the answer. And to Helmut, no, the ARP 24, of course, public comments. A lot of those public comments are substantive. They are substantive that they require us to really fundamentally relook at the IRP. And in fact, what we're going to do, we've agreed with the DM, without necessarily opening a new window of public comment. It's important that we engage, not a written submission, but a more physical workshop-like engagement with people who have made substantive contributions. Because I think that some of the issues they are raising are material. They have to do with the models, the assumptions that are there, and really it's valid. And my view is that we are not going to be dismissive of what people have contributed substantively, over 4,000 submissions, but about 200 or so, very substantive. So we need to engage with those players because we think that there's a lot that we can learn out of some of the critique and the suggestions that they are putting forward. Remember that the IRP is South Africa's response on what will constitute the energy mix. We must really benefit from the contribution of players. Some of them are on the platform. So we're initiating that discussion, sit down, so that there's a common appreciation on what is it that we need to fundamentally reconsider and the kind of tweaking that is required. I want to give assurance to those who have made that submission that no, it's not going to be just end with your written submission. We'll sit down with you. We are going to occasion that. Of course, what it does, it just extends the period, but I think it gives greater confidence on the IRP. And I think tied to this is a question that was raised. Chris, you are absolutely correct. Ideally, you wanted the integrated energy plan, which is an overarching plan. And it's got these pillars of the IRP and the gas master plan and all of that. So we have inverted it. So we have appended it. So our view is that we'll come back to that answer because your answer is material. What is material about that answer? If you think of the most logical way of doing it, is that the IEP comes first and then the IRP comes to support the IRP. Is a question I raised with the team. We have got our own views. We'll sit with the team on how best to remedy that anomaly. But ideally, you want the IEP first before you come to the IRP. So I don't have an absolute answer, but that's the most ideal way of doing it. Of course, there could be a dynamic relationship and make the case that, no, let's proceed with the IRP. I'll come back with that answer. But what I know is that both the IRP and the gas master plan are going to follow that approach. I think the gas master plan, There are fundamental issues that requires attention there. I will not ventilate them here. And we think that it doesn't necessarily give the kind of confidence that is required. And that's why we need to engage with industry players. We're going to be aggressive and yet patient, so you can have those two together. I know it's a form of oxymoron. I used it, aggressive and patient. Don't worry, it's a complete sentence, if you know what I'm trying to say. But it's important that we have the enthusiasm to finalize these documents, but appreciating that they require detailed modeling. That's the point we're making. And we're not going to be found wanting with regards to the detailed modeling and the degree to which we're engaging players in the space. So I want to give you that assurance that we're going to go that route. And then the issues of ESCOM not being, the IPP office not being given exclusive use of the grid and whether that can undermine the public procurement process. Of course, when I came into the picture before this dispensation of the Ministry of Energy and Electricity, we're not responsible for procuring. But I want to state this, which is something I raised with the team. What is the problem statement? What are we solving? Are we solving the credibility of the public procurement process, or are we solving an energy deficit problem? Let me explain to you what I mean. So does it mean that for us to give credence to the public procurement process, we are prepared to delay the onboarding of new generation capacity because we want to protect this process? Or, given the crisis that we are confronted with, whoever is ready must come on board? I'm leaning more to whoever is ready must come on board. There are fair rules for everyone. So if we are found wanting from the public sector, the manner and the pace with which we do this thing is going to discredit our standing in the broader market, because we are resolving a bigger problem. We are not resolving the credibility necessarily of the procurement process. We are, of the public procurement process, we are resolving an energy deficit problem. So if private sector is ready, I'm of the opinion that let them come on stream. It's a conversation we're having internally, but I'm just putting out there, I mean, what my view is there, which I have not yet necessarily canvassed with the DM. But I'm sure we'll find each other, and NERSA has made that determination. My view is that whoever is ready, is available to give us the megawatts, must give us the megawatts. And then we must sit internally and see how best to ensure that simultaneously as we have that market confidence, we are able to show up, if you like, the credibility of the procurement process. I want to argue that you can do both without necessarily restricting market forces on who must come on stream. I think it's important I make that point here. But like I said, it's a conversation for that internal engagement. And then the issues of, with regards assignment of responsibility, the president will do that, I'm sure, in the near future. There are areas that are very obvious. We now are responsible for procurement, we are responsible for the nuclear program, we are responsible for ESCOM as a shareholder representative, we are responsible for SANEDI. So those things are clear. What is opaque is at which point you come in with regards to that value chain, with regards to upstream, midstream, and downstream. We'll leave that to the president. I really don't want to speculate there. But the areas where we are clear we are moving, we are moving ourselves, and Minister, DMRE, and the president will clarify the rest. I don't think that we should stop, wait for the president. We are proceeding. Yes, the minister by law were mid financial year. So essentially what the budget votes were doing was to complete the process of the budgeting process for the 24-25 financial year. So as I speak to you, from a budgeting and accounting point of view, there's only a department called DMRE. And the dismembering and the reorganization from a budgeting point of view will happen from 25 going forward, 26 going forward. And that's why Minister Mantashe went and defended that budget. Myself and Deputy Minister, we really don't know what went into that, so it's not our space. But there's an appreciation, whatever is there is given, whatever can be proportioned to the ministry will be proportioned to the ministry. Whatever is opaque once the president has clarified, then there's going to be that allocation. We're in the process of setting up a department. The DG is still DG Mbele, and then at the right time, we'll announce, once we have gone to cabinet, the president has announced who's the DG of this department. But the accounting officer is still there, and then once we do through what they call the NMOC process, it's just a national government process of how you start a department. Once we complete that internally, then at least the top 3 levels will be able to populate, and then we have our own accounting officer. And of course, once those functions have been clearly demarcated, you can respond to the issues of essentially what's the size of the staff complement in there. And then on the PCC issues, yes, we have accepted that there's a cost associated, an environmental and emission cost associated with the delayed decommissioning. So there is nothing new. I've raised that before. But we are not going to detract over a period of time on our nationally determined contributions on the issues around the net zero path. The Climate Change Act now is in place. It articulates the responsibilities of everyone, coordination by everyone. But now we're faced with a crisis. We're resolving a crisis. The delayed decommissioning is key. I've made the point, as an example, the performance of Grootvlei. I can go into the performance of Camden. I can go into the performance of Hendrina. Those units are continuing to generate, as Mr. Numalo was saying, and I'm sure we'll find a way of how to ameliorate, if you like, the issues around emissions. But for now, where we are staying, and by the way, even those ones that are generating the older ones, they are not beyond their license parameters with regards to emissions. It's an important part, because let's not make the assumption that the delayed decommissioning means that essentially you are outside the license parameters. No, we remain within those parameters. I think that's what is important. Thanks, TK. Yeah, the intention, having said with the DM, we want to proceed with going to the next bid window. I made the point in the last briefing that we're going to sit with the financiers, the project developers. Of course, we've got the convening power of the regulators, or DFFE and the likes, into the same room. We're all going to come into the same room, and myself and the DM want answers to the following question. What has been some of the challenges regarding the previous bid windows? And what is the role that we can play to address those challenges? And what is the role that the players can play to ensure that we address those challenges? Once we agree that they clean these challenges, and whoever needs to clean must do his part, then myself and the DM will then come back and do that mega bid window. But the point I want to emphasize is that we're not going to go at a pedestrian pace in relation to onboarding, going out to the market in relation to bid windows. And of course, it's not a contradiction to the point I've made with regards to reserving particular capacity for public procurement. You can do both. I'm convinced that we can resolve what the market forces are. They are ready, they want to move. Is there grid capacity? Yes, move. As we design that aggressive procurement process with regards to renewables. Because a question has been raised, doesn't that going to undermine that? No, not necessarily. There are parts of the country where we still have sufficient capacity. Whether this is going to be geographic agnostic or not is a conversation we must have. But what we want to say is that we want to give market confidence that we have cleared the hurdles, and those hurdles principally will also include available capacity in areas of attractive renewable resources. That gives the greatest returns to private sector players. So the long and short, yes, we want to do it this year. We're going to sit with them in one room. We're not going to engage with them separately, because there has to be a collective appreciation that the financiers, the developers, the regulators, we all want to resolve the same problem. Of course, ultimately, there's going to be narrow interest that we want to pursue. That's fine. It's a given in any problem of this complexity. But I think the most basic and underlying issues can be resolved collectively. And once we agree, and myself and the DM, we reset the process and we say go. There has to be confidence by market players that we are going to get to a situation where there will be financial close, CODs, available capacities there. So there has to be some degree of alignment amongst all the players. That's what is going to give a great deal of confidence in this, what I termed an aggressive approach, if you like, a mega bid window. You can call it a rolling bid window, certainty to the market. This is the direction that South Africa is going. I want to emphasize that the renewables are going to see the highest exponential growth, if there's anything like that. So X to the power of 3, in relation, X being the growth to the power of 3. To the power of 3, I mean 3 times of what has been the experience. It's one thing to make that pronouncement. It's quite another of how the market responds. And it's going to be very important, instructive, that we resolve those issues, having started from bid window number 1 to today. There are good lessons, there are things that must be unlearned, there are things that must be corrected. That's the beauty of coming a last move advantage. We have the benefit of using the rear view mirror to see what are the kind of obstacles that were there and avoid them going to the future and really open a path for us. The long and short is we are going to do that next bid window, and you'll see it will be ambitious. And in fact, our test is the degree to which we work with the market to ensure that that program is credible. And that sitting with them behind closed doors is important. We have already intimated to some of the players, by the way, that get ready. We have not reached the financiers. We have not reached all the developers. But internally, we have done that. We are aligned with all other ministries. I'm confident that we will be able to get there quicker. Thanks.
Thank you for...
Too much in it.
I got a little shock here, colleagues. I think a lot of information has been shared. We'll just check only in the room if there are any clarity-seeking questions or follow-ups before we conclude today's media briefing, colleagues. Okay, with that, colleagues, I think we've come to the end of today's briefing. Thank you once again for your attendance and your participation. Details for the next briefing will be communicated as per usual. Thank you, colleagues. Have a good day.